Welcome to Surf Strong Elite, Conversations for a Healthy Surf Community. I'm your host, Greg Finch. Before we dive in, I want to let you know that these episodes will either stream or be recorded live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So we encourage you to join in, ask questions, make comments. If you follow myself, Greg Finch, or Surf Strong Fit on any of those channels, you can participate in the conversation and ask questions. We encourage you to do so. It makes the episodes dynamic, interesting, and reach more of the surf community. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Mark Kozuki. Mark has been a physical therapist for nearly 20 years. He's works with professional athletes in the World Surf League, MLB, Olympians, amongst other professional sports. He currently owns and operates Elite Performance Physical Therapy in Costa Mesa. And Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Uh,
happy to be here.
all right. So let's get the most important question out of the way, which is, did you get to surf today?
I did not get to surf today.
Don't worry, don't feel bad. I
Okay.
didn't either. It's like I
Okay.
always tell everybody, you have to at least get a good mind surf in today. So when did you know that physical therapy would kind of be your professional path? Was there a specific moment or kind of an evolution in how you got there?
Well, um, initially, I was very intrigued with psychology, like sports psychology, because as an athlete, I knew that that was actually something that was holding me back. And then, um, and then I had a pretty major knee injury, and I was introduced to physical therapy for the first time. And then I rehabbed my knee, and then later on, I hurt that knee again, which required surgery. And after going through the process again, I was very intrigued by the process of helping someone heal through an injury. And more specifically, I was like, this is something I can do. I want to help people get back to their sports. And I kind of, after that, was very just once I made that decision, I was very on that path to becoming a physical therapist.
Having that connection and going through that path on your own, you probably touched back on that was probably a pretty strong, not just memory, but something you pull into because when a patient comes to you or an athlete comes to you, even if it was a
Mhm,
while ago, you know what that experience is like, is missing whatever that piece
mhm,
is in their life.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, particularly because the injury I had was an ACL injury, and so whenever someone goes through that, I just draw on my own experience, as well as you know now I've seen hundreds of ACLs, so it really helps to see someone through that process now.
When you have, talk a little bit about the difference between a professional athlete coming in. So let's just say it's somebody on tour or between events on the WSL. They not
Mhm,
only have the pressure of wanting to get back to what is essentially their career at that point, but they have pressure from sponsors, I imagine, all these other things. Does that, not that it influences you as a professional, but that pressure within them, is there times where you kind of have to be like, hey, this is what this timetable is going to be, and we'll reevaluate at each step, but you have to let
mhm.
your body heal? Is it different from, say, like me coming in and having a similar injury where the path is, hey, I want to get back to my passion of surfing, but I don't have this external pressure as well?
Yeah, the timetable in a professional athlete definitely it adds more pressure to get things right, get them as best as they can, as soon as they can, but also at the same time to have durability and sustainability, right? So,
Mhm.
I was just talking about ACLs just before. So there was a period of time where it was like success was deemed getting the athlete back sooner, and how fast can we get these guys back on the field and back to their sport? But then they realized that they were kind of blowing them out again. And so then there was a shift of like maybe not how like maybe it's more like, let's look at sustainability so this doesn't happen again. So the kind of pendulum shifted again. But I feel that, with the pros there, it's everything is just geared towards just healing, and you know uh some magic can really happen because they're asking about, like, what can I eat, what can I do for sleep, what can I do, like, it's, versus, like, I don't know, you say, like, this other 32-year-old who works as a lawyer, who's barely making it into therapy 2 times a week. It's just going to be a very different type of experience.
Yeah, looking for almost call it holistic or just complete or whatever word you want to use, but
Hmm.
they're looking for every advantage to come back for both performance and longevity. Like you're right, they
Correct.
don't want to see that re-injury coming, and what can I do
Hmm.
to support it to avoid these things? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'd say the interesting thing is this, like, sometimes with the pro athlete, you're like, hey, you don't have to do all these things. Like, it's lasers and magnets and lights, and
Right.
it can become very extensive to what they choose to include. You know what I'm saying? So it
Hmm.
can almost be like, hey, let's pump the brakes and keep it kind of simple,
Hmm.
because sometimes I've seen elite athletes get kind of carried away with all the um, things that can be done, and
Yeah.
it almost can then create too many boxes to check,
Right.
and then that becomes an issue too. But they're both different, and I'd say the other thing I've experienced too is that, like, the inclusivity of, like, having an agent involved and a manager involved, like, and their compensation is tied in with with the athlete's compensation. It becomes very um, an interesting mix.
Right, because you would love to assume that the best for the athlete is always the priority. But
Hmm.
when you do have those other, yeah, it just gets complicated. It's like
It
you
gets
said.
there's other factors that kind of make it complicated to optimal healing
Yeah.
sometimes.
And going back to that same idea, that idea of checking all those boxes, sometimes everybody, but I would imagine a professional athlete that their life really revolves around exactly what they're doing 24 hours a day. There's never there's never a downtime. There's no space just to let healing happen, recharge. I mean, this is a very far analogy, but like my 14-year-old, it's what we struggle with all the time. Like she's a great kid. She's got amazing grades. She's a volleyball athlete. She does all these things, but it's like the rest of the time is on a screen or away, and it's like there's no time to just have this space to
Hmm.
let other things in, you know.
Hmm.
And and I can imagine, as tied into your career and your path and your ambition and all these things, is just going.
Hmm.
So if you look at the path of elite performance physical therapy, your business and what you have going, is there something on that path that it took you either within your career itself or the business side of things that is taking you on a path that you didn't expect?
One of the things, and I think we're going to talk about it a little later too, is that
Mm,
this discovery of what I call key release or energy release.
yeah.
It's really taken my career in like a slightly different direction. Um, it's kind of drawing in all types of different patients now than I used to get, and it's kind of been a very interesting shift for me.
Well, this is a perfect time. Let's talk about it. So maybe just
Okay.
define the start of it. I'm sure it's very in depth and there's a lot to go
Yeah,
with, but
I'll try to give you the short version of it, but
we'll take the cliff notes part. It'll
yeah,
be
the
our
Cliff
jumpy
Notes part
jumpy
of it.
part.
So um, I think it was in 2017. I took a course on treating nerves, and it involved very light touch, and when I was doing the methods that were taught in the class, I started feeling different things that were being taught, and I started just kind of experimenting with that. And people would often twitch and tingle, like, and sometimes visibly twitch. And I thought that this is just part of this nerve release. And so I just called them nerve releases. This is what I'm doing. I'm doing nerve release. And over time, it evolved where I wasn't on a major nerve, and people would still be twitching. And I'm like, well, what is this? And I was doing it in different ways where I was doing it lighter and lighter and lighter to where I was like just barely touching the skin sometimes. And I'm like, I'm still getting these releases. Like this is interesting. And then when I kind of and I knew I was feeling I was doing something different. Even like I haven't said this another mentioned this before, but sometimes even my body would twitch when their body was twitching, and I was like knowing that something interactive was happening. So sometimes my body would twitch, and I go, "Oh, I know they're released now," and I go get up and walk and see how you feel. Um, but eventually, I really knew I was working with something different. Was when the tension that I could feel under my fingers and my hands, I could sense one time when I went to go touch this surfing athlete's knee. When I went to touch her knee, I could feel what I would feel when I was barely touching her skin, and I just held it there for a little bit, and she twitched, and I was like, okay, like that was interesting. And then just started to treat sometimes starting to treat people if they're open to it, not touching them.
When you talk about almost no touch, when you get to that level of key and stuff, do you think that's something you could replicate not being in the same room on some level?
Yeah, yeah. There's a particular athlete that uh, was highly responsive to what I did. He's from Australia, and we knew he wasn't going to be around because he's going to go back to Australia. So we just started to experiment. So I'm like, okay, well, if I can do it from 6 inches away from your body, how about if I try it sitting in the chair? And if I can do it sitting in a chair, how about I do it sitting in this room? And then he's like, how about we just try this when I'm at home in Australia? And what we figured out, this is obviously just kind of out there, but what we figured out, the system that I don't know, just kind of came to me was um, he would set up his iPhone, and I would say, okay, and we became very close because he would come over here for treatments and come over for like weeks at a time. And so we would hang out together. So he knew my backyard. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be in my backyard. You be where you are. But I want you to imagine you're in my backyard.
Even
And
like closing
literally,
eyes and stuff,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. So iPhone's on him and he's very reactive. So his body actually like twitches and things like when he reacts, right? So the first time we do this, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work, but it was so weird. And it kind of was is just trippy, but I just said, okay, you imagine you're here, your head's here, your feet are here, and you did that thing. I could sometimes like scan a person's body where I'm just kind of taking my hand over, and I can feel resistance, and it was like, dude, this is so weird, but I can feel resistance over this part, and I would just hold my hands there as though he was there, and he would start to react on FaceTime.
do you think it's
So we,
also voice trigger? Like not to diminish or separate from the
no,
actual
because
physical.
actually there were times where I didn't tell him what I was doing, and he would just start to react. So
That
there was
takes
no like,
yeah.
yeah. So it just spoke to like just so many different things, like how connected we are, and like sometimes I can connect and start to do it without touching someone, but I don't want to work. It actually takes even more work to do that.
On
Like
your part.
more, in my part, like more energy, more focus, more. I can't even explain it all, but if I do a treatment like that with that guy in Australia on FaceTime, I'm like wiped out, like just.
Mhm.
And so that's how I've kind of gone on this whole like different path because this method can produce like crazy healing sometimes in people that is just it's fascinating to me how quickly something can unravel, um, faster than what we're typically taught in school that it takes to take for proper healing.
And do you think it, no, I don't want to oversimplify something that obviously is so deep in the connection, and whether it's, neurological, is all of the systems that are involved, but
Mm-hmm.
do you see that on some level as almost allowing that patient to not be protecting whatever the trigger for that injury was, that
Yes,
sense of tension?
yes. Yeah, so a lot of times I would say there's like some emotional component, like you might say fear. Something
Mhm.
happens and there's an emotion of fear that is involved with that, that can create tension within the tissue. And sometimes the analogy that I use is like it's like a guitar string that's like now too wound up too tight. So like the string isn't really like there's not severe damage. Sometimes there can be damage to it, but it's like the tension in it is now changed. So like if you get knocked, that actually that force can change the tension in the strings. And so what I can do with my hands or my energy is to help release some of that tension.
Wow.
So, and sometimes it can be when, like, you could say that's a grade one ligament injury where there's no tearing, but it's like bruised, and it can sometimes be like instantly gone. Or you can have a grade three where there's some severe damage, and still, with taking the tension out, can provide some type of now they're more connected to that area of their body. They can move much better, and it's very I can't fully explain it yet.
Yeah.
I'm still um uh, I'm still like working on teaching it too because I eventually want to teach it as well. But it's just been fascinating for me. It's just been it's it's actually brought a renewed like joy to work because I don't know what's going to happen today,
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
type of thing. And it can and I think it's you're kind of alluding to it a little bit. It's almost like allowing for a space for that own patient's healing to come out, and some of that is uh, allowing that emotional tension that may be wrapped inside of that too to be released.
What seems there's so many things in there, but one of the things that seems really fascinating, and it's almost tied to this idea of giving you a new sense of excitement and coming, is that you could not do that without utter presence. You can't
No,
phone that in. You have to
no,
be right there.
you have to be right there, and I'll say that it's yeah, it's you I will say that, so now I don't treat as many patients as I used to because it involves so much focus. Like I couldn't do it. You know what I'm saying?
Physically,
And
mentally,
I'm
you could only
yeah,
do so many in a day.
I'm fatigued tremendously by the focus that this requires now. So it's not as much physical fatigue because I used to do a lot of soft tissue work and joint
Right.
manipulations and all types of, using my hands quite a lot. But the difference is you can kind of go through the motions sometimes with that, whereas this method, you have to be there. You're you know, I still do the soft tissue work and those things, and I incorporate this with it, to some degree sometimes, but, the level of focus it requires, it's like, I'm pitching innings and then I'm just, like, exhausted.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with like the mental focus. I think the mental focus, even with the athletes that I work with like on tour, um it's the mental focus that's the hardest part.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because to perform at an elite level,
Hmm.
that level of focus and concentration, it's really just the manifestation of all the repetitions of practice, right? Getting up to that moment. So you're on this
Hmm.
new path, but my guess would be that you wouldn't be successful with that if you didn't have the repetitions of the 20 years leading up to that to be able to be that present and arrive at that moment with all of that skill. And then yeah,
Yeah,
that utter concentration. And this is kind of a side question almost, is I would imagine that the success of that would also be tied to how present the athlete or the patient is.
absolutely, absolutely. So, there's a certain like certain people like can really tune into this. I'll say they'll tune in. Like they tend to be able to like meditators tend to be better
Mhm,
responders. Yoga
mhm,
practitioners tend to be better responders. High level athletes tend to be better responders. Um, but there's like some random ones too. Like I was just like, wow, she's super responsive to this, and I wasn't expecting that. You know, and then there's also the reverse where I think like, oh, this is gonna be a slam dunk. I'm gonna do this key or energy release, and it'll be good. And then I'm like, oh, they're not really they're not really connecting, and I kind of just have to then I just start shifting to some more traditional type stuff too.
how much do you communicate the process to them prior to the actual treatment? Are you trying to prepare them for it, or are you just coming in and kind of reading where they are?
Reading where they are, for sure. Um, I have now kind of like a general explanation of what I do, but sometimes I just go in and start doing it, and they don't require much explanation. And then there's some people who I have to keep explaining it over and over again, But it just depends on the client and the read of the feel, the situation. And sometimes I do a little prep, and then sometimes I just start doing it, and sometimes I'll go, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, then I'll start going into that.
I think what ultimately, when it comes down to whatever path you take, right, success is success. If they get up
Right.
and they feel that improvement
Hmm.
or that change, they're like, whatever it is, it's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting. That sounds like something that would be I don't want to say a lifelong pursuit, putting the pressure on you, but it has to be something that evolves and deepens, and you just
Hmm.
become more aware, and that experience that you're bringing into on top of all the physical therapy experience that you have now, this other tool that you're then going to then develop on top of that. It seems like it would just be, that's an
Yeah.
exciting path.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been, like I said, been fascinating. It's like kind of had some renewed sense of like just fascination with work.
Yeah.
So, and I do feel it's going to be a lifelong pursuit. I was like, just telling people like, I don't think I'm going to retire. Like, I just think I'm just going to continue to evolve and continue to be into this. Like, it's just, I'm interested how I will be doing this in even 10 to 20 years, like,
Yeah.
because I feel it's at um, yeah, it's just, yeah, I'm just fascinated with it.
It's a very deep place to explore. You can't
Yeah,
see the
yeah,
bottom now,
yeah,
and maybe
I
never
don't,
will.
yeah, I don't think there's an end to it. So, but I've always been fascinated with refining my technique. When it was even just with joint manipulation or soft tissue work too, like how do you get more precise and accurate and better results faster? With especially with the clientele that I was, that I deal with.
Mhm.
Um, so this has just involved like a different path.
Yeah, yeah. So, if looking back to this point of your evolution as a physical therapist, and just as somebody that's working with people and healing,
Mhm.
could you look at back and pick one of the most important, like, professional mentors that you've had in your life?
Yeah, the first one that comes to my mind is Dr. Tim Brown, chiropractor, who did that surf summit. He kind of put everything together. He I got introduced. I'd heard about him a while back, but I think I got introduced to him around 2008ish or 2009, and started working with him at Surf Contest. Tim Brown is basically like the godfather of sports medicine for surfing, particularly non-surgical stuff. So, um, and he's the one who kind of brought me under his wing, and I learned his style of soft tissue work, and how he would incorporate exercises. And it was just really surprising to me at first because I thought chiropractors just kind of crack people and send them on their way. And so he was kind of this blend of, I was like, he's kind of like a physical therapist, but still does chiropractic work, and he's kind of this blend. And and he was always very warm and collaborative with other professionals, and I thought that was inspiring.
Yeah, that you alluded to in 2018, Dr. Tim Brown put together and kind of facilitated this surf movement masterclass, he called it. And
Yeah,
I we've talked about it numerous times. I reflect on that weekend and the collection of professionals that were there and who we got to learn from that weekend. I just go down the list, and it really was amazing. Most
yeah,
of them I had heard of at some point, one way or the other, but just being there at that weekend and experiencing all of their expertise, and yeah, how giving they were and how collaborative it felt among everybody was amazing. And now 4 years later, some of those names are just, blows my mind to think back and how much more I know about them and have learned from them over the years. That was truly an amazing weekend. So thank you, Dr.
yeah,
Tim Brown. That was,
yeah,
thanks again.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Tim.
If is there one thing we kind of touched on, just what we were talking about with Key and everything. So this might hit
Mm.
this right here a little bit because it's so new to what you're doing and developing. But is there one thing in physical therapy or treating patients that almost no one in your profession agrees with you about?
Well, I'll say one thing is that a big thing right now. I'm not sure if you use this, but is blood flow restriction.
I have
Um,
the only reason I know about that is Dr. Peter Attia's podcast. And I listened to
mm,
that and had
mhm,
that, and I'll let you talk about it, but I
yeah,
don't use it. I don't
yeah, okay,
advocate it for my
okay,
clients.
yeah. So yeah,
It
go ahead.
doesn't,
Sorry.
it just seems counterproductive to me about
Yes,
everything I know about
yes.
the health and flow and everything.
Exactly. So there a lot of my colleagues have shifted towards doing it or using it. So blood flow restriction is where you have a device that limits blood flow to your limbs. So it's like on your thigh or on your upper arm, and you're basically cutting off blood flow to those muscles and you're making them work. And they found through some studies that this helped gain more strength more quickly than the other groups. But for me, I feel deeply that it seems like we're in agreement actually, that, and because this is because of the knowledge I have of working with precision with arteries and nerves specifically, that putting external compression on them and then asking their surrounding areas to work hard, it just, I feel that there's some costs to what they're doing that we're not aware of yet. And so I am not a big proponent of using blood flow restriction, but a lot of my colleagues have now shifted towards using it.
Hmm. So in a way, this is where we definitely agree, is that there's just not enough information to
Hmm.
show that these shorter term gains don't have much longer term consequences. We
Yeah,
just, the data's not there. And so,
yeah,
yeah, but that's how we
yeah,
explore and do all those things. It just, to try something in a technique that just moves something or changes something, and we try and we do it. But as soon as just think of the act of that, it just seems counterproductive. But that's technique. So we'll be in agreement, and then other people will disagree with us, and that's okay
yeah, yeah. There you go.
too. Talk a little bit. So this is a little bit of a transition, because I want to hear, I want to learn. We're going to talk about surfing specific in a little bit. So
Okay.
this last kind of professional question is,
Hmm.
if you could think of an occupation, obviously other than the one that you do right now, what would you like
Mhm.
to try? We have our lifespans are amazing, knock on wood. Don't get in a car accident, don't get
Mhm.
killed. And we have this
Mhm.
potential to have multiple versions of ourselves. What would you like to
Mhm.
try at some
Mhm.
point?
Something that I would be interested in is like, you know, being in a position where I could buy homes and flip them and change the architecture and design and see it all come together, and that type of thing. I think that would be cool. So something like along the lines of like a, you know, somewhat in construction, but also the design part.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because as we speak, when we finish the recording of this, I will be going upstairs and finishing the electrical in our new kitchen.
There you go.
So
There you go.
the that part I do connect with on though because now that Surf Strong Fit is totally remote, I used to have a studio in the past, and now I train only with athletes, surf athletes remotely. And
Oh, okay.
what's great about that is the flexibility it provides and still be able to connect with surfers anywhere they are. But
Mhm.
it's much more cerebral and it's much more technology based. So to put
Mhm.
that away and to go and then pick up a hammer and do some other things, I find like I don't want to do construction full time and I don't want to be on a computer full time. So it's a nice mix between the two. So we'll start our new
Mhm.
side hustle flipping soon.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Here's do you have like a funny story that your family likes to tell about you that you don't mind sharing with us?
Um, the first thing that comes to my mind, I guess, when like you mentioned, it's like family brings this up, is that uh, my niece and nephew always bring this up, or my sister too. But it's at family dinners for some reason. But I used to be an incredibly picky eater. Like I wouldn't. I was very specific on what I eat, and there's a story of where my grandma offered me kiwi fruit, but I was like adamant about never trying it. I'm like, no, I don't want it. And then I eventually tried it and I loved it. So they always like, I don't know why, but that story always gets brought up because I was this very adamant picky eater, and then I was fine with it. But yeah,
Your niece and nephew like that because it's like you got their back.
exactly,
If they ever
exactly,
need to get out of
yeah,
something,
exactly. Well,
Uncle
Mark didn't
Mark.
like this. Yeah, Uncle Mark. Yeah. So that's a story that always comes up. That did Mark eat this?
Do you have like a morning routine that you kind of use? It can be ritual like coffee, or it can be more on the physical side of getting prepared for your day. Do you have anything that you follow that way?
Yep. Yep. So, um, I really started getting a lot healthier during COVID, after COVID.
Hmm.
Um, and my morning routine is now wake up, make my bed. I do 15 minutes of body weight exercises, squats, push ups, lunges, different, mobility drill like movements. Um, do it for about 15 minutes. Uh, and then I typically will take a cold shower for 30 seconds. And that's kind of, I actually don't drink coffee anymore. I don't drink
Hmm.
alcohol anymore. But that little routine is like the 15 minutes of exercise plus the cold shower is like I'm awake after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I do. I'll usually when I'm taking my shower, I'll do that switch to the cold. It ends up being about 30 seconds or so. What I've
uh,
what I've found about that is not only the waking up part, but sometimes the act of going from that comfortable warm water to cold, it might be the
uh-huh.
most difficult thing you do that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
taking that action and knowing what's coming, the
Mhm.
anticipation of that, there's something
Mhm.
powerful about that. It seems small, but
Mhm.
I think it radiates out exponentially. Those little things that we do in our day.
Mhm. I think you're right.
So kind of going on the same idea of routines. So you're going surfing. Do
Mhm.
you have a pre, during, and post routine that you do to try to get back in your alignment and prep and kind of get for that session that you're about to have?
Well, typically that I surf in the mornings, so typically I would do that routine I just told you about, and then kind of do a couple other things, getting ready, and then head out to the beach. So typically when I get to the beach, I'm pretty like feel pretty open. If there's an area of my body that like I feel needs a little more attention, then I'll do a little more movement or activation before I go surf. But generally, by the time I'm ready to go surf, I'm like feel ready. I might do a few little movements here and there, but I
Mhm,
don't do as much on the beach.
mhm,
And then typically I finish my day, and this is kind of more of a newer thing within the last 6 months to a year. I finish my day with more of I've gone back to static stretching, like traditional stretching in the evenings, and been feeling a lot better overall with that. That's
mhm.
also because I've reincorporated jujitsu into my life, and that's pretty hard on the body. And I feel that I can actually, before I would train um, jujitsu like 2 to 3 times a week, but now I train 4 to 6 sometimes,
Wow.
depending on surf. So the surf down here has been good through, it was good September, October, like almost for the whole time, basically. So I didn't do as much jujitsu, but we went through this spell. I think it was in April-ish, March or April. It was like our surf was terrible. We had terrible winds for so long. That's actually one of the things that got me back into jiu-jitsu because I wasn't surfing in the mornings. And here, there's no surf in the evenings either because of the onshore winds, or
Mhm.
afternoons or evenings. Um, but anyways, the routine I have is I've actually gone. So I'll do my rolling and my stretching in the evening before bed, and then when I get up, I'm doing more activation, dynamic movements.
Mhm. Yeah, that's pretty. Here on the Central Coast in Morro Bay, it's a similar kind of cycle, except we don't get the Souths as much as you guys do. So we have longer stretches in the summer. But
I see.
those afternoons and evenings, when the winds are up, I had a couple of long-term clients. Like the area around here has great mountain
Hmm.
biking, and I did that in the
Hmm.
past. And
Hmm.
I had a couple clients that are just really, really good mountain bikers, and they're like, "Get a bike, get a bike, get a bike," because I was doing the same thing. I would do my regular fitness away from the water, and then the surf would go flat or blown out, and my output would plummet. And they're like, "Get a
Hmm.
bike because now you can go, it's perfect every day as long as it's not raining. It's 4 to 6 feet on the mountain every day."
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the other
yeah.
thing that was interesting about that is having that other thing that personally for myself is nothing's going to overtake surfing. That you talked about
Hmm.
earlier with the key, the presence to surf. You have to be right there. It just doesn't work any other way. There's so many circles moving to line up. You have to have that. But what I found, interestingly enough, as much as us as surfers, the passion that we have for that, it's so amazing how often you can talk yourself out of it. And I think there's something in there as that primal part of your brain, which is just lower risk. Eat sugar, salt, and fat, and lower your risk. And as
Hmm.
much as surfing is feeds us, there's a part in there that is it still has risk for your primal brain. Lower that. So what I found
Hmm.
for like having that other thing for me mountain biking now is when I'm standing looking at it, I can say to myself, you either are going to go paddle out right now or you're going to go mountain biking later. And mountain biking is certainly not a punishment, but it's not as good as surfing. So I find it
Hmm.
pushes me in the water more. It's like,
Hmm.
go do
Hmm.
that thing because you have to get it somewhere.
Hmm.
Talk a
Yeah.
little bit. Talk a little bit about jujitsu for me. That's
Okay.
something I've always had kind of a I've been fascinated by that. I don't have any
Uh-huh.
experience with it.
Uh-huh.
Most, if you would say martial arts, I don't have a lot of I don't have any background in that. Talk a little bit about that, what that is on the physical for sure, but really the mental piece of that to me, because I that's almost what I'm the most fascinated by. Like what makes you successful, not as a
Yeah.
professional athlete, but as the path on jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So jujitsu is fascinating. Actually, how I got introduced to it was when we were on tour in J Bay. And there were some guys that did jujitsu, like Michel Burez, and there were a couple other guys. I think it was actually Felipe and another Brazilian. But um, um, I came into one of the houses and I'm like, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" They're like, "Oh, we're doing jujitsu." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And they were kind of just rolling around, and like I was like, what are you guys trying to do?" And he's just like, "Oh, just try this. Just try to get past my legs." Like I think Michelle was on his back. He's like, "Just try to get past my legs." And I'm like, "Try to get past your legs?" And I was just started going, and what was crazy about it is I was like sweating and panting like just after a few minutes of trying to pass his legs. And I remember I had a backache, I think just from the travel, because like to travel to J Bay is like, I don't know,
Too
35 hours, 38
too
hours
long.
door to door, door to door. Um, and what intrigued me about it was the how it made my body feel and all the dynamic angles. Because in training we typically think very like in one plane, transverse plane, frontal plane. There's some diagonals, but this is just very dynamic, like trying to control someone's leg that's resisting you, and it's in different, it's just totally different angles. And I was like, wow, my body feels activated in a way that I've never felt before. So that's the fact that my body felt more active, my body was more open the next day, and it was challenging my mind to try to, how do I get past this guy's legs? And then it goes much deeper than that, because it's actually becomes more of like a physical chess,
Mhm.
so you may grab someone's sleeve or someone's arm, or there's so many different ways to kind of enter in. You may grab their leg, and you're trying to produce certain responses that you want, and the other person is trying to do the same. And so there's this whole mental side. I think another thing that's really cool about it is you have to stay calm under pressure. So someone may have your back and may have a good position, but you need to be able to stay calm so that you can get out of this bad position and change positions, Um, I think that's a little bit, it's kind of like a different version of a cold plunge, So when someone has your back, you just gotta breathe, stay calm, and get out of the situation.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
so many comparisons that you could pull in there to even just
right.
back to surfing specific.
Mhm.
Breathing, calm
Mhm.
under pressure,
Mhm.
multi-dimensional,
Mhm.
rotational,
Mhm.
dynamic energy,
Yeah.
not expecting something that's coming and be able to react to it without
Yeah.
overreacting. I mean, the
Yeah.
comparisons go on and on. The
Mhm.
other part of that that's always been intriguing to me is, um, there's of course tradition and all the things to go, but at its core, it's nothing but you, and it's not even who you're competing against. It's really more of like it seems like almost such a collaboration between that.
Yeah.
The-
Mhm.
that idea of connecting with somebody that way and going through this. I mean, I can only compare it to like when I had like a short little stint of wrestling in high school. The first few times I did that, like I thought I was in pretty good shape, was just exhausted. Just
Yeah.
stopped and it was how many minutes was that? 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Can't even breathe right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a can be an incredible like workout physically. It's a good mind workout too, and um, it's just another different challenge to like learn the new techniques, and then you're trying to perfect those techniques.
And
You practice them.
community and connection, I imagine too. You're going to the same location, you're seeing the same individuals.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So I work with in Surf Strong Fit. I work with a lot of different kinds of surfers, but there's a general theme. A lot of the surfers that come to me are 30 plus on
Hmm.
up. Some
Hmm.
younger, but mostly within this kind of age group where there's some commonality within there, which tends to be, oh, suddenly I have a mortgage now, and I have a full-time job, and maybe I have
Hmm.
kids, and I have this increasing level of responsibility, and they don't even have this realization yet, but what's happening is the way that they communicate it to me is they're saying, my surfing is just dropping. There'll be times I'll go out and I've surfed for 20 years plus, and things that I just can't make things happen like I did before. And we start talking
Mhm.
more about it, of course. And what I almost know before we get into it too deep is one of the first questions I ask is, okay, over the last month, in season, wherever they are located, in season over the last month, how many times have you surfed? And they'll say whatever they say. And I say, okay, compare that to when you were at the peak of your surfing performance, and how many times on average were you surfing within a month? And it's almost always 2, 3, 4 times higher. So
Mhm.
I want to kind of put this scenario past you and get
Mhm.
your professional feedback on somebody that's let's just call him Bill. Bill's a 50-year-old longtime surfer, has been surfing for 30 plus years, and in a few months he just put a deposit down on a big surf trip. Maybe he's going to Indo, maybe he's going to South America, but he hasn't surfed in a year. um,
Mhm.
for the sake of focus, let's just say he doesn't have any specific injuries or
Mhm.
any underlying health conditions, because that would be almost a different
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm.
Which of course is rarely true because we all have something going on. But he feels tight. He
Mhm.
feels paddle weak.
Mhm.
And during the last time he did surf, after paddling out, he had to let several sets go by because he couldn't catch his breath. So, what would be your suggestions for Bill to get ready for that surf trip?
Mhm.
And that's a
Uh,
big question, I know,
yeah,
so you can take segments of it.
yeah. So one thing I would have him start is probably like that routine of 15 minutes a day, just starting to get your body moving if he's feeling real tight, just that would be one thing that starts getting him on the right trajectory so that, and you said he's going to go in 3 months
Let's
ish.
yeah, let's say 3
Okay,
months.
so 3 months, he's going to move a lot better and feel a lot more flexible just from doing that, because that's just adding one little thing in every day. Um, if he's able, if he is he an a if he was in an area where he's able to surf, I would just encourage him to start surfing more, because the paddling itself, nothing can kind of really replicate that. So just getting into paddle shape again, starting to duck dive waves and paddle and work on timing, positioning. I feel that, you know, if you're able to surf, that's a great way to start getting some conditioning in. And I usually recommend some other type of cardio, whatever, and kind of going with what they like, because like some people like to run and some people don't like to run, and some people are cool with mountain biking or biking, and so involving some other form of cardio is another thing that I would recommend. um, I would probably incorporate some type of core work as well that could possibly be mixed in with the 15-minute training, or it could be something separate. I've actually gone back to resistance training, so I feel the benefits of that too with my jujitsu and my own surfing. So um, there was like a period of my career where um, I wasn't as focused on resistance training because I felt a lot of times it made athletes too stiff, which predisposed them to injuries. But I feel now that it can be balanced out and that the gains are pretty nice to have with your strength. Um, Particularly, I notice it in jujitsu, just grabbing arms and pulling on legs. That if you have a little more strength, it's going to help you. Technique is the underlying thing, but having some just pure strength helps too. So,
So, define as you would define it to people listening. What is resistance training to you?
so to me, resistance training is something that's going to involve something external that makes the movement um, more challenging. So you could use resistive bands, for example, and do a row type movement, or you could be bent over a bench and do a row with a dumbbell. Now you're getting extra weight or resistance to the movement to improve your power or strength. So those are the things I've been slowly incorporating again that I haven't done for years and years. I've been mostly kind of went through a phase where I was just mostly doing body weight stuff, like things on a ball, um, different forms of core training. I use red cord. I use different things. Red cord is kind of like TRX, but
Mhm,
more versatile.
mhm. Well,
Um,
multiplanar,
yeah,
if I remember.
multiplanar. Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm. Yeah.
multiplanar. Um, a little more dynamic. Uh, I also incorporate DNS into my treatments, which is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, which comes from Prague. It's kind of based on how a baby moves. So the premise is that no one teaches a baby how to move, but just at certain stages, it learns to like roll over and get up from its back to its side to all fours and crawl. And those movements are what helps our muscles and bones and joints grow uh, correctly. Those movements that they go through help to um, how should I say it? Just helps to develop our bodies correctly. And the premise of DNS is that adults too can then go through these movement patterns to help reset and rewire the brain and get the joints more centered together. And so sometimes I incorporate DNS exercise into what I'm doing as well.
Yeah, my first exposure to DNS was also at that 2018 Surf Movement Masterclass, and during the presentation, it was so much great information. But what I always click back to, and what I is so stark in my memory, is they flashed up one of the pictures, and they're showing this child, infant, toddler, I guess, in a squat position, of course, and it's perfect. It's perfect form,
Hmm.
totally untaught, of course, and every alignment in foot
Hmm.
position, knee, hip, shoulder, everything, and they're just down in this natural position and they could stay there forever. And it does just reinforce how much we unlearn over this time by different movements and then tension and tightness. And it almost goes back to some of that key. It would be interesting to see. You wouldn't be treating necessarily a toddler, but it would be interesting to see how present they could be through some of that technique. And I imagine it would be very high.
Yes, actually, that is another thing is that kids are
Yeah.
very responsive. And I find that the older the individual is, sometimes it's harder for them to tune into it.
Yeah. And you touched on a little bit when you were talking about it before, and it might just be a little bit of a theory or projection for you, but how much do you think of that is that fear of either the injury, fear of loss of control, or wherever it comes from? How much of do you think of that is based in fear?
A lot,
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. Almost any topic that we could bring up, we could ask that question and it would be a lot.
But yeah, and the more that as I'm as I'm progressing, it's tuning in, it's listening very well to what the words that they use. And um, there's lots of clues they'll say. Sometimes they'll say, "I'm afraid of doing this," and you're just like, "Whoa, they're afraid of sitting," you know. And so then I start to go in like, how do I not only with my hands but also with suggestion, like just go, how do I convey an energy and words that will kind of insert a different program in that it's going to be okay,
Right.
you know? And
It
so,
so circles back into like the start where you mentioned the sports psychology piece of it, and
yeah.
trust
Hmm.
issues, and I mean,
Hmm.
again, it just goes on and on.
Yeah. So I've definitely become the sports psychologist that I was originally interested in because it's a critical part of performance, sports performance, and it's a critical part to healing. And, you know, it's just been a fascinating journey, and kind of even the understanding that the placebo effect, the placebo effect both works in both directions, and they call it a nocebo when it's a negative, but that same great power works in both directions. And I feel that with the right presence, energy, listening, words, you can take some, like, usually people are actually noceboing themselves and taking them into further limitations than they actually need to be. And so with the right presence, words, listening, treatment, you can get incredible results very quickly, because now you're tuning into that. You're taking them out of taking them out of basically limiting their own selves to now unlimiting them.
Which then would, in a lot of ways, probably release the energy that they're taking in that area to protect
Yeah.
themselves, and
Hmm.
allowing them to then adapt it to whatever you're working on to improve.
Hmm.
Wow. Yeah, that's oh man. What a great path for you, coming from
Yeah.
that start and through all of these last 20 years of this physical, much more hands-on therapy, and circling
Hmm.
back around and marry them together. That I can see why you're excited to go to work now.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just like, um, I'm kind of just playing every day at work, like, just kind of just doing it slightly different. And like, what if I do it this way? That's a little bit better. But what if I do that way? No, it's not a good. Go back to this way. And change it again. And it's constantly churning different knobs, pushing different buttons, kind of seeing patterns. Like, this patient kind of reminds me of this, and kind of like, we'll try this and that, and then it usually just gets more refined over time.
It's like it's really just you're building a tool chest to see where this replicates often. So I'm going to use
Hmm.
some of this, and then oh, that I remember that time before. Of course, that's
Hmm.
experience, and it's also
Yeah.
just fine tuning the technique of it. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's so fascinating. We could talk about that for hours, I'm sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so I have a question for you now. So next week there's a day where you don't have any responsibilities, not professional, not personal on the calendar. Okay, I know this is daydreaming a little here. We all have something, but just pretend. How would you spend that day if you could spend it anyway?
Hmm. So how would I spend that day? Well, if, I would do my morning routine, and then I would go surf, right? And hopefully the waves are really good.
Oh, it
And
is. You're
then,
daydreaming. They're
okay, so
perfect.
yeah, so it's just like, I don't know, 6 to 8 feet and offshore, and no one's out.
Just some friends, just some close
Yeah,
friends.
just close friends. We're at the secret spot, and then I'd say we surf for a few hours, just tired, and then um, like 2 to 3 hours, and then if I can make it, I'd go to the 11 a.m. jujitsu class. If not, I'm okay, and then probably have nice lunch, maybe take a nap, and then train jujitsu in the evening. And if I still had energy, I'd lift weights.
And that sounds like probably a pretty common day that you're able to get within your month. Not all the time, but those
No,
components, you're
yeah,
living the life.
components. Yeah, I'm not complaining right now. No, I'd say
um,
like I'm usually getting wet surfing or doing jujitsu. I've dedicated my life to a much more active lifestyle, particularly since COVID. Like I hover around 155 now. I used to hover around 180, 185.
right,
Yeah.
right at the end of COVID or thereabouts when things
No,
started opening
before
up.
that I was dropping weight then, but I'm definitely have a healthier lifestyle.
What was the
You know.
shift? Do you think? What was the shift? Just you stepping back, whether too much within the business or the treatments that you're doing? What was the shift that?
That was part of it. It was also just COVID going, hey, you could just, get sick, and so it was more about me like, okay, how do I optimize my health more? I don't feel that this narrative was spoken about enough, but healthier people are generally going to be much better off, regardless of what illness they contract. Um, I feel like the the shots were to some degree overemphasized, while diet and exercise were not, emphasized nearly enough. So yeah, my shift was partly just because I wanted to get healthier and just optimize my life more.
Yeah, I had this last weekend. We went up. I Morro Bay is just south of Big Sur, so we
Hmm.
have some close friends that have a place up there, and they were just inviting some people over for some music, and and not huge, but enough to where I was running into people that I hadn't seen since before COVID, for sure. Some of them, just
Hmm.
people are still slowly starting to, in the circles and people being busy again, so you're just not interacting and seeing them as much. And a couple friends that used to come when I had the studio, and we would do group training together, and they just reminiscing on missing that. And
Hmm.
one thing I do particular when now that the business is fully remote, I this doesn't happen as often. I still see people that I train out in the community, but not nearly like when I had a physical studio. That was much more often. And
Hmm.
I do a very big separation as much as I can. My You can never completely separate your professional experience and your point of view, but I like to interact with somebody as Greg, not as Greg the trainer. And so, but it happens on occasion, and it happened this time where this one person was just saying, yeah, I just tried to do burpees the other day and, some push-ups, and I could barely do any compared to when I was coming to the studio and doing it. And we got into this conversation, and this is something I work on and try to remind myself of. I interact with other professionals quite often, and we have a language and maybe a base knowledge that, not that we take it for granted, but it's just something that we have that we pull from. And I was just talking to this individual and realizing that they're like, this idea of muscle atrophy, of just, if you're not using it, your brain is not going to maintain it, because it just takes way too much energy and way too many calories, and it say you're not using it and it's gone. And really just kind of saying that to them, just almost as an aside, and they kind of stopped me. And later I saw them again. It was a party, so we're moving around, and he stopped me and he pulled me and he said, I've never thought of it that way. And it really punctuated for me this idea that maintaining strength, like almost back to COVID. And I have a couple
Hmm.
family members that are older now and going through some things, and maintaining strength as long as you can, as
Hmm.
consistently as you can, is
Hmm.
so important. So there's your PSA for the day. Everybody take that for what you will. But maintain your strength. Okay, so a couple of fun questions to end as we wrap up here. One is, do you have a surf destination that you just love, that you've gone to either numerous times and can't wait to get back to? That's part A. Part B of that is, do you have a dream spot that you've never been to that you can't wait to get to? Being on
Uh,
tour, that's a little unfair. You're a little bit skewed as a professional.
yeah. I will say though that the tour thing it was good and it exposed me to a lot of places, but I will say that a lot of times it was like a tease because I was working so much,
Right.
and that any of the good times the surfers wanted to be out there and I was just kind of getting scraps. There were some times where I got some good surf, but there were also some times where I was working the entire time, or at least the entire
You were
time that the
so close
surfer.
to Disneyland, but you were stuck in
Yeah,
the parking lot.
yeah. So it was cool though. But I will say that I think that my favorite place is J Bay. It's very magical there. The wave is amazing. The energy of South Africa is amazing too. But surfing the wave at J Bay, I just remember like catching one of my first waves, and you can feel this wind flying at you and just going down the wave. It just feels like you're flying. I literally felt like I was flying down the wave. And it's like an incredible wave. Like it's fast and powerful, and super fun. The one place that I want to go that I haven't gone is like one of those just nice waves in Indonesia. I've been to Indonesia, but I wasn't like these barreling longer waves that just seem perfect. So something like the Mentawais or Kandui or something would be, a big box that I'd like to check someday, like some boat trip or something like that.
Are there three or so books, you can plus or minus, that
Okay.
you recommend most, and why do you recommend them?
Well, the one book that I recommend mostly, and this is more to colleagues and people who are in the health field, but I think it'd be good for kind of anyone to hear or get this info is that, and I don't even know how I stumbled upon this book, but it was called The Lost Art of Healing by, he's a cardiologist and his name was Bernard Lowen. And after reading that, it just kind of revolutionized how I was approaching people. And the premise a lot was like on listening. And also, he kind of just pointed out in the book that doctors always prepare for worst case scenarios, and because they want to minimize litigation, so they do more, um, and prescribe more than is necessary, and more tests than are necessary, and end up kind of a lot of times can overtreat the patient, and the same time can um, limit the patient in their recovery by a lot of times what they say. And so he goes into a lot of storytelling about how he would just kind of start to play more with hope, giving patients hope. And so I think the example was a cancer patient who should have just lived months, but just kept saying, well, yeah, go on that surf trip to across the Atlantic and do that. You'll be fine. You got plenty of years in you. And he just kept living. And so I've kind of incorporated that into my practice.
Yeah, that idea of that, it it's so easy to discount that idea of this
Hmm.
positive manifestation of things as it's just frilly talk and whatnot. But
Hmm.
there's so much of the there's so much of the brain that we just have no. I talk about the deep well and not seeing the bottom. I mean, we know so little about that.
Hmm.
And that idea of, I mean, even just go very simply and not even to terminal or health, even, and just how you start your day. Like when you mention your morning routine and making your bed, that is such a critical thing. It seems so small, but
Hmm.
it's starting your day with this positive. And like
Hmm.
our 14-year-old, it's like these little things. I really kind of incorporated that to her and talked to her a lot about it. And now her room might be a mess because she's 14, but almost every day her bed is made. And it's that idea of like, if you have a crappy day, which we all have on a varying degrees sometimes, you come
Hmm.
home and you are getting into something that you already completed, and you're starting your sleep on a positive note and starting your day on a positive note. Those little things become incremental, and that positive progression is so critical.
Yeah, for sure.
You have any other books?
Oh, the other book that I recommend to people is Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it just talks about intuition, and just how, lots of little stories, lots of little things about intuition. And so since that time, I've just been more aware of it. And I feel that most of the time, I've been checking my intuition and go, okay, this is what, well, for whatever it is, I always kind of take note of like my gut feeling is this, and then I might go into reasoning and do this. And I find that most times that kind of quick, snap judgment is usually pretty clear and accurate. And I teach my students to try to tune into that. This for me particularly, it's like there's kind of an ocean of techniques and an ocean of exercises that you can provide with someone, but you start to develop the ones that work well with you, and you find good results. But a lot of times how to incorporate that. And sometimes for me, it's like, do I want to give this exercise or should I give that exercise? And I find that a lot of time, if I'm just tuning into my intuition, it helps me particularly with what am I going to do? Where am I going to go with this patient? Because there's just so many things you can do. But I find that kind of tuning into your intuition can help tremendously. And that works for work stuff and all types of life stuff.
Yeah, it's checking back in. It's
Hmm.
having these little tools to come back to presence, right? It's just the
Hmm.
idea of our head is always going so many different places. And now with so much input that we get every day, it's just stopping. It's so interesting how often I repeat a lot of the same things to clients. It's like stop and breathe. Okay, 3 big, deep nasal diaphragmatic breaths right now. Like you can't say it enough. And it's so funny because
Hmm.
every time I say that to somebody or write it or send a message, I'm telling myself. That's what's so interesting about that is you
Hmm.
never stop learning that. So those
Hmm.
foundational things to come from and check back in. And I'll go to this. I'll give this short little analogy that happens all the time. People will come and they'll say, "Well, like a surfer will come and say, okay, I want to get into better surf shape. What should I do?" Right? Which, of course, is a huge question. It's like which I imposed on you, which you did a great job of making succinct. But my response almost, and this is a casual, exchange. Say at this party, it could have happened easily, and I'll say anything every day for the next 3 weeks. Just start being consistent and a positive progression, do the foundational things. And if you can do that 10 minutes every day for the next 3 weeks, come back to me and I'll get more specific with you. And it's not putting them off or it's not flippant in any way. It's really just
Hmm.
trying to get back to the core part, which is information overload is so common for all of us. We are looking
Hmm.
for answers or quick fixes or whatever it is, and it's just the will to stay consistent, like your 15-minute routine every morning. It's like
Hmm.
that's it's not a loaded question when I ask guests like, "What's your perfect day like?" But when that part of that routine that comes back in, that just shows us where that core piece of starting and checking back in. It's like begin again every day. Begin again with
Hmm.
those positive things.
Hmm.
Where can people find you online?
Online, our website is pteliteperformance.com. On Instagram, I believe it's PT underscore elite performance. And then my Instagram is Mark Kozuki on Instagram.
Mark, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time. All the stuff that we talked about is amazing. That among all those things, that key that is so it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Just how deep that. Well, we don't have to go into it. Go back and listen to the show again if you want to hear more about that. But I'll have all of Mark's contact information, reach online, all of his book recommendations, all of this information I'll put in the show notes for you guys to be able to click and get to that. Follow up with me. You can direct message me. You can find us at surfstrongfit.com. On pretty much all the social medias, it's at surfstrongfit. I'm Greg Finch. Thanks again to Mark. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you,
We'll,
Greg. It's been an awesome talk, and I really enjoyed it.
thanks so much. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for tuning in to Surf Strong Elite. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe because that helps this podcast reach even more surfers. I'm focused on keeping our surf community healthy and surfers strong in the ocean till their last breath. Together, we can do just that. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.